So the second section then is it's discussion around a concept that came to me starting about a couple of years ago, and I've been refining it since then and working on alliances and partnerships. And the idea here, it may be a little bit weird for those who are hearing it for the first time, which I think is most of you in this room. But I have a concept that basically we need something like open source for AI, but the current existing definitions of open source are insufficient. And I'll tell you why. But that right now in the pitched and heated battle between trillion-dollar tech companies and trillion-dollar economies around intellectual property, and that's musicians, Hollywood, all the book authors, and all the newspaper columnists, everyone. You have this pitched battle between content owners and content producers and the LLM and AI companies, and they're like this. And no one really is thinking a lot about, hey, what about the commons? What about people trying to open innovation? What about all these things? No, it's right now just $1 trillion versus $1 trillion, and it's a global fight, right? Lawsuits are popping off in many different countries, and there's not a global settled jurisprudence on any of the stuff. So my thought around this is that if we can build a new legal and technological foundation and a policy framework for AI that defends the idea of a data commons and can lead us to building commons artifacts, AI artifacts, around that data commons, then we'd actually be doing sort of the next generation thing that we need to do for the open hacker innovator kind of community. So that's really the heart of all of this. So the bottom line here is that these large AI models rely on a giant corpus of copyrighted data. There's just no way around it. They require a lot of data, and people are just doing all sorts of stuff. They're hiding it, but they're doing a lot of this kind of using copyrighted works to train. And I would assert that existing fair use or text and data mining exceptions, open source licenses, these are all insufficient for the way that AI creates derived works. Right? Ultimately, all copyright protection is built around the concept of building a derived work or a mechanistic reproduction of a prior expression. But LLMs, they don't do that quite like that. And that's what causes a fundamental sort of like flatland versus third dimension problem. The capability now transcends what the copyright and mechanistic reproduction infrastructure contemplated. So the proposal that we have is a new AI-centric licensing framework that clarifies data use, the ability to do derived works, liability around the derived works, and ultimately it fosters a mode of transparency around the data inputs into these large models. So I think when we first started going down this path and thinking about this in like 2023 timeframe, there was a sense of like, well, this is fun to nerd out on, but does it really matter? Because like the AI singularity is going to happen any minute now. Like Sam told us that's going to happen. OpenAI clearly is going to just run the world. And like, does any of this matter, right? And then of course, AGI didn't quite happen, and other models came around, and then people started suing people. And it starts to show that like, hey, you know what? Just because you're a multi-billion dollar, $100, $200 billion AI company doesn't mean you get to do whatever. You're not insulated from litigation. People will sue. Just this week, Disney, I think, filed a lawsuit against Midjourney, right? There are ongoing legal battles. They will continue. And because AI is a global thing that's happening, the jurisdictions there's a lot of different complexities around this. Just because you get one lawsuit settled a particular way in the US doesn't mean it'll do the same way in Japan, doesn't mean that the EU will have the same view on it, and that's just a few different regions out of hundreds of regions in the United States, in the world. And so the other problem is if you just think about this from a policy perspective and you don't really care about the economic outcome, whether Hollywood wins or whether OpenAI wins, if you say, look, from a legal and market reality perspective, this kind of ambiguity around the training data, around the legal ambiguity around whether or not having copyrighted training data is a problem, that ambiguity encourages opacity, right? So companies are hiding this training data, and this not only creates a chill on innovation and people sharing with each other, but it also creates a real issue if you want to have any kind of auditability around what goes into a model that's advising on things. It could be on law, it could be on medicine, on things that really impact significant things. You really need to know what's going into it, because it's a sausage making process, right? What goes in, what goes out, there's conservation of that. So So this kind of opacity is really bad from a policy standpoint. And also, there's a weird thing that's showing up, which is that what we call low resource languages, so they're languages that have fewer tokens, don't have as much digitized. It doesn't mean that these are culturally less rich. It doesn't mean that these languages go to cultures that only have 5 people practicing them. It's just languages and cultures that are less wealthy, let's say, than the United States or the G20, and they have not digitized a lot of their cultural heritage. So, and their languages maybe are more oral, and there's more oral and spoken stuff that is not yet turned into text that can be easily OCR'd. Those low resource languages, they are really, really screwed, because it is way easier to build a crappy translation model and take a westernized AI model and then convert that, than to go and try to digitize all that data and do all the various things you need to do to make a legitimate culturally sensitive model. Now, why does this matter? Well, this matters because if we don't solve this problem, what ends up happening is we're going to end up with essentially AI becoming a massive cultural, it's a massive engine of cultural hegemony, basically. And this is not just theoretical. I was at the Paris AI Summit, and so there was a small workshop with some UNESCO and UN people, and a Finnish AI researcher was commenting on the fact that when they compare native Finland-trained models versus a model that was just essentially a Western American model with a translation, these are extremely different things. That the latter, where you just translate an American model to where it sort of speaks Finnish, it doesn't sound Finnish. And now that's just for another Europe. That's a NATO country, right? You think about going to someplace in the Indonesian islands, you go to one of these lesser resource languages. There's so many languages in India, right? All the cultural heritage in the global south. All these things run the risk of being just bulldozed, even as their governments are trying to do the right thing by bringing AI in and trying to have all this AI first, AI forward kinds of things. If we don't get real, if we don't get serious about creating a transparent AI and data commons and having standards and best practices around this, what will generally end up happening is just total Western hegemony over the rest of the global culture. And that's really, really bad. So the other thing is that right now, the way that the AI models work, the way that LLMs work, there's a tremendous amount of complexity around the definition of what is a derived work. This may seem like law school nerd out, but it's not law school nerd out. This is actually really, really important. Right? The fact that we can do open source software, the fact that we can do, I write some code, I put it out there and say, take it, do whatever you want with it, and then you can take it and then build some stuff with it. That all works because there is a well-defined concept of derived works. And fair use and these kinds of things which exist in the American IP law, those things allow us to have some flexibility around this. But with the way LLMs work, are they memorizing? Are they transforming? At which point are they generating things that are economically competitive, or are they not? And also, there's there's the training data, there's a whole bunch of infringement stuff I won't get into in the interest of time. But if we go and we look at the open source software, the Free Software Foundation has a concept they call the 4 freedoms. The 4 freedoms of open source. The freedom to run for any purpose. Right? You bought a computer, you got the software. I'm telling you this software is free software. What that means is you get to do whatever you want with it. Okay? Number 2, the freedom to study and modify. You can look at it, you can look at the source code, you can modify it, you can study it. It's yours. Freedom to redistribute. If you like it or if you don't like it, for whatever purpose, you can take this thing and give it to another person. I'm not going to limit your ability to give this to someone else. That's the 3rd freedom. And the 4th freedom, important, and tying into the previous slide, the freedom to distribute modifications. You look at this thing, you study it, you run it, you tweak it, you can give those tweaks out to a friend, right? Those are really, really, really important. Traditional licenses, though, that have served open source software so well for these freedoms, they don't really address the intrinsic challenges of AI, right? And with an AI LLM model, you cannot separate code and data. And I don't know how many of you work for a data company or have done anything commercially relative to data rights. It's a vast and very litigious space. It's very different than the software space, where software, again, is a copyrightable artifact, generally governed by concepts in copyright, including fair use, and also including licensure. So you can get a license.txt file and know that you're in the clear. When you start mingling data in, especially possibly PII data, trade secrets, God knows what, now you have this jumbled artifact that isn't just code anymore, it's code and data, right? And so, you have these data licenses that rarely address derivative usages. Like you go and buy a data set from Wall Street, they don't talk about derived use. You don't have rights to that generally. There's no indemnity on it at all. And I don't think we talk about the indemnity part here. But one thing that people don't think about is next time, if you're interested, you should look at an open source code repo. Maybe you have one on your laptop right now. When you look at the license.txt, even before it gets to what you can do with it, the very first thing it says, usually in all caps, it's very seldom that geeks from the 1970s type in all caps, but they do in this case. In all caps, does anyone know what it says? Right. This software is provided to you as is. No warranties, implicit or explicit, are made about its fitness for use for anything whatsoever. Think about what the implications would be if there was not such an indemnity. If you work on NumPy and somebody at Boeing takes your NumPy code and simulates the airflow over a wing and the airplane crashes, and you as the free software maintainer for NumPy somehow catch liability for this, it would be utterly absurd and impossible, right? So because of the fact that, again, software is an IP artifact that is under copyright, because it can be licensed, we attach these licenses, and the first thing we do in screaming bold is to say, I'm completely indemnified. If you use this thing, you indemnify me completely. That indemnity and that liability back does not necessarily pertain to data. If you get some training data, you get an LLM, and someone else puts some training data in there, and now all of a sudden it's generating hate speech, it's generating CSAM, it's generating all this stuff, someone's going to be liable, and the FBI is not going to take a not it for an answer, right? So when we talk about trying to build an open, regenerative, collaborative commons for AI and whatnot, there are a lot of things we've got to actually solve before we can have that be a possibility. So, in any case, just as a high-level view, I'll read this out because this is actually quite important. For those of you who are not, again, copyright and IP nerds, right? In the United States, we have a fair use doctrine. In European Union, they do not have fair use. In the EU, they have what's called a text and data mining exemption, but that doesn't necessarily apply for fair use. So for instance, Common Crawl, here in the US, they operate out of the US because of fair use. They crawl all these websites. If you're a Common Crawl researcher working in the EU, you collaborate with the Americans, but you cannot be running crawls out of the EU because you don't have that blanket fair use exemption. Africa, right? Global South, all sorts of provisions are not available. There's efforts right now to create an Africa-wide Africa data license that basically does something more closer to what America has, builds on top of their existing patchwork of text and data mining exemptions, and just makes it possible so that when a researcher in Nairobi goes and tries to build an Africa native set of like LLMs or speech models or text synthesis, text-to-speech models, they don't end up getting sued by everybody there in Africa, right? So these are the kinds of things that we have to lay the groundwork for in order to build this kind of global thing. But anyway, the net of this, and sorry to spend so much time on the details of what's broken and what's wrong, but it's really important to understand the depths at which we have to go and build and plumb from the bottom. You have trillions of dollars of creative industry value being threatened. You've got a ton of stuff being locked down, content restrictions, all sorts of things. The internet is rapidly closing down. We have academic papers citing real numbers on the amount of stuff that's getting locked down and closed down. And ultimately, what the net of this, though, is the only people who are going to afford to be able to do any kind of AI research and AI work are the trillion-dollar companies being run by the great men in the arena. And I think that's a load of crap. I think that's not the way we do real innovation. So anyway, without going more into all that, what I'm proposing and the stuff that I'm working to put together is a thing called AMPLE, the AI Model Public License. The goal of this is to protect creator rights. The goal of this is not to shut AI innovation down at all. It's to make everything much more clear, to protect creator rights, to give creators a way to express explicit consent as to what can and cannot be done with the ideas embedded in their expressions. It provides indemnity, so we can actually have a collaboration around this kind of stuff. Defines standard boundaries between derivative use, transformative use, indexing, query and retrieval, so on and so forth. And it has a built-in mechanism similar to Creative Commons. It's a family of licenses. So if you want to have stuff that's available for research, for education, but then if it's used at scale by for-profit entities, then they have to pay in a little bit. All of these things are compatible in this family. So this is not like a classical GNU copyleft sort of thing. This is something that is built in to be as a framework, basically, for commercial and for research. So first and foremost, we provide mutual indemnity for people using and for people consuming. There's a transparency clause, so there's a source manifest about exactly what goes into it. There's some kind of threshold for what would constitute a derived output versus, or direct reproduction versus derived output. And so lots of people can derive benefit from this. If you're a researcher, you know that you will not catch accidental infringement if you're using ample licensed content. If you're a company, again, you have a clear and simple way to understand how much exposure you might have as you use certain kinds of models. Regulators, as we're starting to build this out and get adoption around this, regulators can actually have a legal entity to talk to. Regulators can actually look at what is working and what's not working to guide their policy, as opposed to trying to write AI regulations from scratch, being informed only by the wealthiest lobbyists, right? And of course, many people looking at this will say, okay, hold on a second though. There's a bunch of objections. Number one, we don't really need this, right? I've certainly had this feedback from people who say, look, fair use or text and data mining, they're good enough, and we're off to the races with these models. I mean, this stuff is already, whatever, Peter, you can nerd out on this stuff if you want to, but the horse has left the barn. We don't need this. And the truth of the matter is that some people are able to do this work. Usually they're Americans in America, but hopefully I've convinced you that there's enough texture among all the different countries in the world that we do need something that actually can address this at a global level. Second, this is actually a very shocking point of feedback I got from a researcher at a $1 trillion company. And he said, reproducibility is overstated, right? Because one of my arguments about visibility, about transparency was that then people can reproduce the work, they can actually rebuild a model and verify, so trust but verify, they can verify that nothing bad went in there. And this guy said, look, even with identical inputs, billions of dollars of compute resources are required to be able to build these things. So it doesn't really matter if this is transparent. It doesn't really matter if we tell you what's in the training data. And my counterpoint is, number one, of course it matters because I want to know, so F you. But also number two, the compute costs are coming down, and newer kinds of models could be much, much more efficient. And also, by the way, when state-level actors, when sovereignties care, they certainly have access to enough supercomputers at the national level to be able to go and build models every bit as good as someone like a Facebook or an OpenAI can, right? And then the third one, there's also a point of feedback from some AI friends of mine who said, look, instead of wasting time on all this crap and like nerding out on like, is this particular thing in Common Crawl free for use or available or not, we should just focus on building better AI, because we're gonna hit the singularity. AGI will then make luxury communism for everyone, and then we'll be done. And the sort of the general argument is like, why should we engineer safeguards in when what we need is technological advancement? And my counterpoint for this, I think that maybe the only possible counterpoint, is that as long as human thinking actually matters, we need systems that connect human input to AI. And so we need to actually trace the provenance of that human input. We need to know where humans can plug in and in what manner they've plugged in. And even if we move to full AI to AI kind of system, you still want to have some auditability of that. So, but the last and probably most important objection I've heard, at least early on, less now, but early on, was this concept that the horse has already left the barn. That, okay, look, you can go and build this ecosystem around licensing all you want to, but like DeepSeek is already there. People are using a Chinese model. They don't care, right? Llama's already there. No one cares. Like, who cares? We're building models. People are using them. People are plugging corporate enterprise data into like opaque API endpoints from Claude and GPT. And my basic counter-argument to that is that people are doing what's available. If we are able to actually build an alternative, I think a lot of people will be very interested in it, right? Number one, we have a transparency revolution that's starting to happen. And I have to salute Anthropic for their great research on, and their continuing research on mechanistic interpretability, on all these kinds of things of really teasing apart what is inside the model, what's in the LLM. When you get these things coming out, when you do circuit tracing and you start actually being able to see what's in it, it's going to now no longer be, the whole great man needs to be able to scrape everything in order to build AGI. That argument falls apart. Because now we can see what's in it. We can say, oh, here's the part where you scrape that stuff, and that's why this thing sounds like Hitler, because you scraped that, right? We can start connecting these dots, and you can now are liable. Now you're gonna start catching liability. And this is true not just for the frontier labs, this is now true for enterprises that adopt this stuff, right? So in many of the enterprises, many of the enterprise conversations I've had around AI, Gesundheit, people there in businesses, they're deeply concerned. They're not like, oh, we're just here to build AGI and I'll get rich and go away. They are trying to run a business in a robust and in a responsible manner. And they're like, wait, I don't know what's in this thing at all. This can go and just do random stuff. It could generate this kind of text and put that into various kinds of forms and fields that customer sees. I can't do this, right? So the adoption of things like RAG, the adoption of all these LLM evaluation things, people trying to figure this out, it just speaks to an underlying undercurrent of an enterprise desire for transparency around this that maybe the big frontier labs don't want to talk about too much. But if we're able to produce an artifact, an AI model that is transparent, we say this is exactly the data that went into it, and here's how you add more stuff to it, here's how you take stuff out of it, that is a deeply competitive artifact. And lastly, and this is a really important point, even if the horse has left the barn on all the scrapable stuff, on all the common data that's out there, it's done, Peter, don't worry about it. We've already scraped all we need to build this model, and we're not going to distill into the next gen model. All of that, what it actually does is it puts a massive premium on all future human data. So this isn't just about the one horse that left the barn, the 10 billion, trillion, whatever tokens that have already gone. There are an infinite number of tokens to come. Every single one of you, how many people here are taking a picture or recording this video? There's a camera here, obviously. None of you are, right? So there's way more data not being captured in every moment, in every room, for every person, than there is data that's already available. And the future world that's coming, we're going to have AI and LLM and other kinds of AI-driven techniques and capabilities. We're going to have those available in our pockets. We're going to have those available on our computers. We're going to have AI touching sensors and data everywhere. And if we do not have a kind of legal and technological capability to lock that stuff open, to keep that, to make it shareable, to make it something that we can put an open source human ecology on top of, then of course it will all just go be owned by Google or Apple or Facebook or Microsoft or whoever. And that's the point of this effort, is not just to go and do right by all the data, all the horses that have already left the barn. This is also for all the foals and the baby horses that haven't left the barn yet. All the horses to come. And we can build, we can build a better barn. That's the kind of thing. The barn still matters, and we're going to build a better barn. The way that this is where we're at right now in the project, we're building the legal framework to address sort of the provenance gap around some of these licensing documentation issues. We then want to go and collaborate with some of these efforts that are creating open data sets, things like C5, FineWeb. There's a new model that Luther just released, trained on open and provenance data. All these kind of technical integrations and collaborations, we absolutely believe that on open and public and commons data, we can build a GPT 3.5 level model. But unlike all other models, it is one that we can actually go and say exactly what data went into it. And if you're enterprise, you can use that as the starting point for your RAG, the starting point for your fine tunes. You can use that as a thinker in your chain of thought or in your mixture of experts. Creating a truly commons artifact like this and then having a license and legal framework that makes this a globally available and globally good to use, free to use, safe to use kind of artifact. That is, I think, the first leg, like the big green Lego base plate that we need to then kick off a global AI commons kind of revolution. So we want to have partnerships. We're looking for partnerships, looking for people who are working with existing data providers who are looking for something like this. They don't want LLMs tainted with copyrighted materials as the foundation of what they might offer. So they might want to use this as a base model. We have absolutely a nonprofit and open community-based approach, but we also know that for this kind of very kind of expensive project to be successful, it must have an actual, it must be able to capture revenue and be self-funding. And so there's a B2B aspect that we're also looking at for this. Yeah, some of the related projects and potential collaborations. So we've already talked to some of the largest open data set providers. That includes Common Crawl, that includes Software Heritage, includes folks like Wikimedia, Internet Archive. There are corporate consortia like the AI Alliance, which Anaconda is part of. There's an open data initiative as part of the AI Alliance to do precisely these kinds of things, identify big public open data sets. And then we have some ongoing discussions with other groups. Actually, not pictured on here is like Harvard. Harvard just announced a really interesting thing called the Institutional Data Initiative. So a lot of universities have access essentially to millions of volumes of books that are already part of the Google Books data set. And I think the numbers, something on the order of just Harvard alone has something like 1 million volumes in the Harvard Library. And that's about 24 billion tokens that they have access to. And then when you start rolling up all of the other institutions and institutions and libraries around, not just the country, but around the world, you start ending up with a giant corpus of human public data that can be used as the baseline for building actually an incredibly great model. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. Love to chat with people who want to either get involved or who want to help fund this to some extent. I'm personally basically funding this myself. I'm also talking to Anaconda current investors and whatnot to do this kind of in collaboration with the corporate entity that I founded. But this is something I finally sort of feel like not only did I figure out what needs to happen, but I've gotten enough validation from lawyers, from other projects, from the community in general. I feel like this is definitely something that we can do and we can make it happen. And this would completely change the name of the game right now. Like right now it would go from great man to democratized innovation in a heartbeat if we could put something like this together. So thank you all for your time, and I'm now ready to take questions.